Good morning. In the summer of 2002, Karen and I moved to Western Maryland. I had been ordained just a couple weeks prior, and I had been assigned by the Bishop of Maryland to oversee a small church in a community town of about 1,000 people. If you were here for my first ever sermon, where I talked about jumping into a pool in my underwear to save a drowning dog, the story I'm about to tell you takes place a couple days prior to that. So just to put it in some context, if you didn't hear that sermon, you might want to, and you can find it on the YouTube channel. So this story, it was a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't yet started at the church, but I was living in the house next to the church. And the town was having its annual beginning of summer fling at the park that was just a block from our new home. For some reason, Karen was going out in the early morning, and the plan was I was going to go down to this beginning of summer fling to start to meet people, and Karen would join me there. And I thought, all by myself, that I thought it would be best if I showed up looking like a priest, right? And that the town's going to want to meet this new minister, and how are they going to know who I am if I'm not dressed like one? So I put on my brand new black suit that I had just gotten for my ordination, and my brand new black clergy shirt. It was still black. It was not worn in gray like my shirts are now, and like I am now. And I had my brand new stark white collar, and I marched downtown. And in my head, I imagined people would see me and they would just come over to me and want to shake my hand and introduce themselves to me and ask things about me, and they would tell me things about themselves. And friends, when I tell you, no one spoke to me. I mean, no one spoke to me. I walked around that little festival to each of those tables and in my black suit, and I smiled with eyes wide open, and people just sort of looked at me and just went about their business. I did about 2 laps of the fair, and I was about despondent. I mean, I was just, are you kidding me? No one wants to talk to me? No one wants to introduce themselves, and you know, I was sad and I was hurt and I was a little miffed, and I decided I'm just going to go home. And so I went home and I flopped on the couch and just sort of wallowed in misery. Like, this was a huge mistake. What am I doing here? What have I done with my life? This is never going to work. They're never going to like me. They're never going to love me. All those thoughts and feelings going through my head. And right on cue, Karen came home. Now, remember, Karen wasn't expecting me there. She was expecting me to be down at the fair. And so she asked me, like, what are you doing here? And I said, it was terrible. You know, no one spoke to me. No one looked at me. And then she asked the incisive question. She asked, did you wear that? And this is where I got a little defensive, and I said, well, how are they going to know I'm the priest if I don't look like a priest? And she goes, Rick, go upstairs, put on normal clothes, shorts and a t-shirt, and let's go back down together. And I was like, it's not going to work. They're still not going to talk to me. But I went upstairs and I put on normal clothes, and we walked down together. And we had a perfectly lovely time. And I think part of that was that I was not wearing my black suit at a summer fair. And part of it was also Karen was next to me, and she's very good at being with people and introducing. And it was lovely. I usually tell that story to Karen grew up about 45 minutes from that church. She grew up in West Virginia, in Appalachian culture. And so I usually tell the story as a way to say, in my first posting, Karen was my Appalachian whisperer. She had to sort of interpret the culture to this kid who grew up on a resort island. And that was one of the places where she did that really well. But this story it's also a story of impatience on my part. In about 20 minutes, I had written this town off and stomped home, ready to shake the dust from off my feet and ask the bishop to go somewhere else. And perhaps patience was something I needed to learn, and perhaps it's something I did learn. Throughout this last year, most of our gospel lessons have been coming from the Gospel of Luke. We have a 3-year lectionary cycle. We are in year C. Most of our lessons come from Luke. Next year, beginning at the end of November, we go into year A, and most of our gospel lessons will be from Matthew. And the year after that, most of the lessons will be from Mark. And then we rinse and repeat, and we're back to Luke again. Luke has a theme that shows up throughout his writings, and it's the theme of faithful, patient endurance, of waiting. The very beginning of Luke's gospel, we meet a couple. They are an elderly couple. Their names are Elizabeth and Zechariah. They have wanted a child. They've never been able to have a child. They waited and waited, and they kind of gave up. And then Zechariah meets the angel Gabriel in the temple. And the angel Gabriel says, you are going to have a child. He's going to be a son. And they have this child. And he is known as John the Baptist. And then not long after that, Jesus has been born. And 40 days after Jesus' birth, Mary and Joseph take their newborn son to the temple. And we meet 2 more figures, Simeon and Anna, who are, we are told, in the temple every single day, praying and waiting for the consolation of Israel. They're waiting for the world to be made right again. They've discerned that things aren't going so well, but that God will make things right again. And when they see Jesus, Mary, and Joseph come into the temple, that is the sign to them that things are about to be made right. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 3 Gospels, we have the parable of the sower. It's the sower who goes out to sow seed, and some seed falls on rocky soil, and some seed falls among the thorns, and some seed falls on good, fertile soil. But only in Luke do we get this extra explanation where Jesus says, "But as for the seed in the good soil, these are the ones who bear fruit with patient endurance." In Luke's gospel, which centers patient endurance, the good seed that falls on the good soil is the patient and enduring seed. It is only in the Gospel of Luke that we have this morning's parable, the parable that is usually known as the parable of the persistent widow or the unjust judge, that Luke tells us that Jesus gives to remind us to pray always and to not lose heart, to endure, to wait, to be patient. Luke also writes the book of Acts, and waiting and patience are throughout Acts as well. Right before Jesus ascends into heaven, he tells the disciples to wait for the Holy Spirit. A whole bunch of the action in the early chapters of the book of Acts takes place not on the road, not going somewhere, but with the apostles in prison, waiting to get out again and again. The later chapters of Acts have Paul on a long, arduous journey to Rome, a journey that took far longer than it ever should, a journey where he is shipwrecked on the Isle of Malta for 3 months. Over and over again, Luke presents us with examples of patient endurance. We think that that's because Luke's community was going through some things and needed to hear this message. But I also think every age needs to hear this message. I have to say, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people these days from across the political and ideological spectrum, people who are worried about the state of our world and where we are going. We may be a very divided nation, but we are united in our anxiety. And yet, Luke presents us with this idea that waiting, patience, faithful endurance is not something we do on the way to a spiritual life, but waiting and patience and faithful endurance is the spiritual life. The whole story of the scriptures begins, one of the main stories is a story of God's people wandering for 40 years in the desert, going from point A to point B, a journey that really should have taken them just a couple of weeks. 40 years. Do we think that God is really all about meeting our needs the very moment we need them? Patient endurance is the embodiment of faith and trust. That while things might be uncomfortable now, that we are in God's hands, and that at the end they are good hands to be in. Patient endurance requires us to remember that the story of God and God's people is a long one. Some of us are reading the Bible cover to cover this year, and we have been confronted with the fact that the Bible is not just an instruction manual where you just open it up and it just simply tells you what to say. It is just story after story after story of people going through strife after strife after strife, and in the end, enduring and making it. Patient, faithful endurance requires us to remember that we are not alone. We are joined with our forebears in faith, but we are also joined with each other, who are each going through our own struggles and our collective struggles together. It requires that we notice and we take time to notice the places in our world where there is joy and wonder and grace. Because when things are hard, it is so easy to get tunnel visioned and only see those things. But morning by morning, God gives us mercies and grace still. Faithful patience also requires an active waiting. It is not just a sitting back and waiting for something miraculous to fall out of the sky. But a faithful, patient endurance is one where we keep showing up and where we actively partner with God who is actively at work in the world. Part of that is inspiring others who need to be inspired, sort of like my wife coming home and telling me to go upstairs and change my clothes. In so doing, we might create a community of faithful, patient endurance. In the late 60s, early 70s, Stanford University, the psychology department, did a famous experiment. The experiment is called the marshmallow experiment. It is wonderful. They took children, small children, 4, 5, and 6, and they sat them at a table in a room, and they gave them a marshmallow. And the idea is that they could eat that one marshmallow now, or if they waited 15 minutes, they would get a second marshmallow. And then the person running the experiment would say, "I'll be back," and they leave the room with the child alone with the marshmallow and a camera. If you have not seen the marshmallow experiment before the Eagles game today, fire up the internet machine and look up the marshmallow experiment, because there are some wonderful videos of these children just squirming in their chairs with this marshmallow tempting them. Some of the children start talking to themselves in order to distract themselves. Some of them sing to themselves. Then some of them pick up the marshmallow and feel it, and then they smell it. Some of them break off the tiniest little bit of the marshmallow and eat it. There's one girl who takes the marshmallow and takes a bite out of it, and then another bite, and she eats it like it's an apple until there's just the core of a marshmallow left. There's one child who licks the marshmallow and puts it back, and then licks the marshmallow and puts it back. Then there's one good boy who did not eat his marshmallow, and the experimenter comes back in the room, and she gives him the second marshmallow, and she begins to explain that you did really well, and he does not wait for the explanation. He takes both marshmallows and stuffs them in his face, and his eyes roll back in his head. It is just wonderful. I love watching those videos, partially because they remind me of me. And if you watch them, they might remind you of you too, because we all struggle with patience. And sometimes it's not over a marshmallow. Sometimes it is over other and bigger things, but we can still squirm. We can still wiggle in our chairs as we wait. I have a bowl in the narthex of marshmallows. And on the way out, you are welcome to take a marshmallow as a reminder. Thank you. You are welcome to take a marshmallow as a little reminder of the patient endurance that God invites us to. You're welcome to take one. You can take two. You can eat it like an apple. The only thing I ask is you don't lick it and put it back. Amen.